Interesting question I saw, and that is a fairly common one. We know that tzedakah is a great mitzvah, and Jewish people excel in tzedakah. The question then becomes, let's say you have a case where we make a special collection for tzedakah, and for whatever reason, the money is no longer needed. So this could be for a number of reasons. One is often the case, let's say you collect extra, right? Let's say you think that it's going to cost $80,000, and the fundraiser is so successful, you get the bonus round, whatever it is, and you get $100,000. So that's question one. To whom does that extra money belong? Then there's another question is, let's say the entire thing turned out to be a mistake. You thought that they needed money, right? You thought this person was in dire straits, and it turns out this guy's wealthier than you. So what do you do in that case? And in a third case is, let's say it wasn't a mistake, right? At the time, it was needed, but then something changed. Let's say the person got money, or the status changed. So what's the halacha in all these cases? To whom does the money belong? On the one hand, you collected money from all these people, they gave tzedakah, and now it's, for whatever reason, no longer needed. So the Mishnah Shekalim tells us clearly that let's say a person collects money on behalf of a mace, a person that passes away, and their money is needed to provide a Jewish burial. So the halacha is, if there's extra money for that in that specific instance, it goes to the Yerushalmi. It goes to the inheritors, the people who inherit it. And the Gemara says, why should they get it? The answer is because with that embarrassment that the person has to bear, the person knows that it's embarrassing, that he's going to have to come on to others to provide his burial. That kind of gives his children a right it's kind of a Yerusha of sorts. It gives him an inheritance of sorts, and it gives them the right to retain that money. And similarly, the Mishnah says that let's say,
I would have thought Chaver Kadisha.
Okay, so this is going to be the next case. Let's say it wasn't a collection. The first case I discussed was when it was a collection for a specific person. So in that case, it goes to the children. However, like as Rick mentioned, let's say it was a collection for burial in general, right? For the Chaver Kadisha. So if there's leftover, right? There's leftover, and then the Mishnah says it goes to that person. However, let's say on the other hand, so that's case number one. When there's extra, so that's clearly that if it's an individual, it goes to the individual's children. And if it's for an institution, it goes to the institution. On the other side, we have, the Yerushalmi talks about a case where you collect thinking that the guy had no money, right? A person died and you think this guy had no money. I remember this case in New York a couple of years ago when, what was his name again? He was a well-known person. He used to collect money. And everyone thought he was dirt poor. And it turns out when he passed away, he was very wealthy. He knew how to save his money. I don't think he ever spent a penny in his life. And I remember my uncle, every week he used to come to my uncle. I used to give him $10. Turns out he'd been saving up quite a lot of money, and when he died, he had lots of money. So could you imagine such a case? I don't know what happened in that case, but in such a case where you make a big collection for his Chaver Kadisha, everyone give money for Yankel's kavura, and it turns out this guy had I think he had like a few $100,000, like a nice amount of money. So in that case, the Yerushalmi tells us, the Yerushalmi actually brings a machlokas, but the Yerushalmi seems to conclude that in that case it was a mistake, right? And we have this concept all over Shas, all throughout the Talmud, that if the whole thing was a mistake, then we could say that I never intended to give money in such a case. I intended to give money for a guy who needed. This guy was richer than me. Why is he taking my money? And in that case, the halacha is that it would go back to the people who gave it.
He was a Democrat.
What?
He's a Democrat.
What do you mean?
He took money.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but then we're going to talk about, let's say you have a case in the middle, right? So it wasn't a mistake, but something changed. So what's the case of that? So the classic case is, let's say they collect money for pidyon shvuyim, right, which is to redeem captives. Now we have to understand that redeeming captives nowadays, which Baruch Hashem, most of the live ones are out, but it's fundamentally different than it was back then, and it might make a practical difference. Back then, it was usually, most of the time, they were taking captives for one reason, only money, right? They would grab somebody and they would say, okay, you want them back? It's for X amount of money. Nowadays, unfortunately, it's for much, much worse. It's either to kill them, or it's to get their own prisoners out, so it might make a practical difference. But in any case, let's say they took a captive in exchange for money, and then he died in captivity, right? So what do you do then? So then we actually have we have two opinions it's an argument between the Rosh and the Rashba, two of the great Rishonim, and the Shulchan Aruch actually brings both of these opinions down. He says, Moshe go l'pidyon shvuyim, if they collect the money for redeeming captive, umeis kodesh nifta, and he dies before he's redeemed, yesh misha omer shem shel yarshin. So some people say that this is like the first case, right? The case of the Mishnah Shekalim, that you collected money for a cause, the person dies, it belongs to the inheritors. And some people say, no, that's different. right? Because in that case, the money actually went to him, and there's some leftovers. So that leftovers goes to the children. But in a case when it wasn't actually used, so then the second opinion says that no, the children don't get it. It has to go back to the original people. And the Shulchan Aruch seems to be lazeh das notav zman hazeh. Damrinan the tayyib shalom nesadol daskach. We assume that the people did not intend to give such a reason, and the Shulchan Aruch seems to indicate that it would go back. You would have to give it back to the original, to those who gave it. However, it does seem that the practical halacha is not like the second opinion, but rather that it does belong to the person who was collected for it, since something changed. So a case that came up was there was a person who in Eretz Yisrael had a certain sickness, and they had to collect money. Whatever, there was no treatment, I guess, in Eretz Yisrael for that, and he had to go to America. And lo and behold, the miracle happened. He got to America, and the doctor said, "There's no sickness. Baruch Hashem, whatever it was went away." So who does that money belong to? Right? Do we say that it was a mistake? So it clearly was a mistake. At the time, it was an authentic, legitimate need. Right? But since now it changed, so it would seem to be dependent on these two opinions. But it seems like the halacha, it follows the first opinion, that it would belong to him, and he's entitled to keep the money, because ultimately at the time of the collection, it was a legitimate collection, and the money would belong to him.
Did they wind up keeping it though? That's a curious thing.
I believe that was. I think that's what happened.
Wow.
Yeah. I think some of the poskim said that it would be best if he said he's entitled to the money, but it would be best if he says, listen, put it towards somebody in a similar situation.
I know a situation they donated an ambulance. They took the money, they bought an ambulance with them. He didn't. It went very quick, and they didn't really need the
Right. So that would be best. But in theory, it seems like he's entitled to the money.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When Moshe Rabbeinu had to stop collecting for the mission,
Oh yeah, I was one thing of that also.
he already had, I think, some extra. What did he do with
What do you do with the extra? That's an interesting question. But in that case, so that would be like the Mishnah Shekalim, right? It was a legitimate collection, and there was extra, so that goes to that cost. So it would go to
Hektish.
what? It would go to Hektish, exactly. Because at the time it was a legitimate collection, there's extra. Very good.
Yeah, but they said they used it for repairs later on. They put
Right, that's what I'm saying, but it went back towards the cost.
Yeah, it went back.
Moshe Rabbeinu just said enough.
He said it right.